Hi everybody, my name is Hannah and this is Pepper and Pine, and I have another chalk drawing to share with you today. This is for the letter Q for our Islamic Waldorf-inspired main lesson block on the letters. So the first thing I'm going to do is erase our previous chalk drawing. I am using chalkboards from waldorfsupplies.com. They are 32 inches by 22 inches. I'm also using my Sargent Art chalk pastels. These are beautiful chalks that have a brilliant color. And we're going to start off this chalk drawing by kind of doing a rough outline. I'm using a white chalk to do this, and this is going to help me get kind of an idea of where I want everything for this chalk drawing. I am going to do a throne, and it takes me a couple of tries in order to get this one right. And this is going to kind of represent the throne that Prophet Sulaiman alayhi salam brought from Queen Bilqis's castle or her palace and had it changed just enough for her to kind of recognize it, but not entirely. Later we're going to have a queen coming in through the doorway here, and she's going to be holding up her dress, and so the dress and her crown and her headpiece is all going to look like the letter Q, and her foot is going to be stepping right onto the glass floor, which looks like water, but in fact it is glass. And this is for the story in which Prophet Sulaiman alayhi salam has one of his birds going out to different areas, and the bird comes back with a message that the queen in an adjoining kingdom worships the sun, and so he sends his messengers with a letter inviting her to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. She doesn't want to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but she sends gifts instead. Prophet Sulaiman alayhi salam returns the gifts, and she's kind of intrigued by this, so she decides to go visit him in his palace. And Prophet Sulaiman alayhi salam also had control over the jinn, as well as could speak to animals, and he could understand animals, and he also had control over the wind. So he had a lot of powers and blessings. And so he has one of the jinn bring her throne to the palace, which is also built by the jinn. And when she arrives and she sees her throne, she's kind of like, that can't be my throne. How could he have gotten it so fast? And how could he have gotten it away from the guards? And then when she sees the floor of water, and it's actually not water, it's glass, she's like, that's not possible. Anyway, she ends up being a follower and worships Allah from that point forward. And so we're trying to make the interior of the palace, and it looks a little bit more like a castle versus a palace, because the descriptions are that it's supposed to be brilliant with crystal and marble and all these really beautiful natural materials like stone and other things, but I wasn't able to really capture that essence in the chalk drawing as well, and so we ended up doing kind of just a classic brick design. And so my daughter wasn't crazy about the look of the chalk drawing, but when we do our crayon drawing, it actually looks a little bit more sparkling and bright and a little bit more like what we would have envisioned that palace to look like. So that brick wall took quite some time to do. I also want to add some sconces to the wall just to kind of brighten it up and add a little bit of color and detail. But that was also a little bit challenging to do, and I struggled through the first one, and I managed to get 2 more on there. They don't look great, but they serve their purpose of adding detail and color to that wall. So with these chalk drawings, I generally will do something that includes a little bit of detail, so that though your eye might go to the main part of the chalk drawing, you also have something else to kind of look for and enjoy. Something else about these chalk drawings is that I have chosen not to draw historical figures, and so the queen that's depicted in this chalk drawing is simply a queen with a really drapey long dress and a beautiful headdress, so that you can still get that shape of the letter Q. If you prefer not to draw humans or animals, then you could still get that shape in the dress and in the headdress, and then you could just skip drawing a face. We went ahead and we did some hair and a face, but we left the face blank. We did not put eyes or a mouth on her. Alright, so I'm working on the throne at this point, and it's proving to be kind of challenging. I'm trying to add decorations and jewels and other things, but it's looking a little bit cartoonish, and I wasn't really pleased with it. It works out okay in the end, but the thing about working with the chalkboard and chalks versus crayons is that sometimes you can't get the same kind of detail that you normally would with the crayons or even with color pencils. Now, throughout this whole series, sometimes the chalk drawing turns out better than the crayon drawings, and sometimes the crayon drawings turn out better. In this case, I feel like the crayon drawing turned out better than our chalk drawing, and in part I feel like because this particular scene is supposed to be in a palace that is really bright with crystals and light and glass, it's not coming off that way. It's looking a little bit more like a castle or more dungeon-like, and in part it's because we're working on a solid black background versus if you're doing this with a crayon, you're doing this on most likely a white background. And so in this case, our crayon drawing turned out a lot better. It was a lot brighter, and it looked a little bit more like the palace that's depicted in the story. But there are some perks to working with the chalkboard. One thing is that you can work on the entire background first and then work on the foreground because you can easily erase when you're using your chalks. One thing that I wanted to keep in mind while doing this for my daughter is that we're going to be now doing this with our crayon drawing, and it's important that I have all the elements in place so I know how to teach through that drawing process. And so when we do the drawing, we'll work on the things that are in the foreground first, and then we'll layer in things in the background. So working on the chalk drawing first actually really helps when we're getting to that part in the lesson. Something else is that I have to be mindful of how much detail I'm putting in the chalk drawings. With each chalk drawing, I do try to have the main focal point, and in this case, it's kind of two. It's the queen and her throne, but then I like to have a couple of details in the background, something just that the child or the student can look for. So we have some candelabras on the wall and a chandelier up in the passage that she's walking through. I also have a wall that looks a little bit more like a castle wall rather than a palace. And there's a lot of detail on that wall, which I do like because it adds a little interest into our chalk drawing. But at the same time, I have to be mindful that I don't add too many elements that are too difficult for my daughter to do. And when we did our crayon drawing, she just left the entire wall just gray. And I thought that was a great way for her to be able to achieve actually a better look and still have it resemble the chalk drawing that she was copying. I'm adding a couple more details before I call this chalk drawing done, but one thing is that once I was finished, my daughter saw it and thought that the ground didn't really look like the glass that the queen was supposed to be walking on. So once I am done with the chalk drawing, I actually come back in and I add blue to the entire floor, which I think was a great call that my daughter made, and so I'm really glad that she pointed that out, and I'm really much more pleased with the end result. So I'm just adding the chandelier up above the queen, and now I'm going to come back in and try to kind of make it look like it's on glass and add a couple of shadows here and there. I'm going to mess around with the queen a little bit more. Unfortunately, her face and her feet look kind of skeletal, and that's just one of the problems working with chalk, that you just can't get a smooth finish in a small space. And I tried to go back over her face and I kind of wrecked it, and so sometimes less is more and you just kind of have to leave it the way it is. I also want to accentuate the letter Q before I finished off the chalk drawing. So at this point, I've come back into the chalk drawing with some blue chalk just to really accentuate the fact that that floor is supposed to be glass. I do like that finishing touch in the end. I think it was really good that my daughter had pointed that out. This is what it looks like in the end. I am really pleased with the way it turned out, but I'm actually even happier with the crayon drawing. So if you'd like to see that lesson as well as the other lessons in this Islamic Waldorf-inspired main lesson block on the letters, you can tap on the screen right now. If you want more information about this curriculum that I have created, you can find it on my website at pepperandpine.com. And if you want to see how our homeschool is progressing on a daily basis, you can find me on Instagram at pepperandpine.